Brett McKay here, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Manliness podcast. To be successful at their craft, magicians must possess the well-honed technical skills to pull off their mystifying tricks and clever sleights of hand. But as magician Steve Cohen observes, they must also be masters at attracting interest, holding attention, and leaving audiences with fond memories of their time together. Skills that everyone can use to persuade audiences, charm dates, own a room, and influence others. Steve, also known as the Millionaire's Magician, is the author of Win the Crowd, Unlock the Secrets of Influence, Charisma, and Showmanship. Today on the show, Steve shares the insights he and his fellow magicians know on everything from taking command of a room, to creating a compelling character, to making a magical entrance. Steve shares how to build your boldness through put-pocketing, develop spontaneous resourcefulness, get people wrapped up in the magic of your message by suggesting rather than stating, increase your confidence by having a place for everything and everything in its place, and much more. At the end of our conversation, he shares two of his most interesting tips and explains how to influence people to do what you want by using layered commands and the trailing or. After the show's over, check out our show notes at aom.is/winthecrowd. All right, Steve Cohen, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So you are a magician and you call yourself the Millionaire's Magician. Where did that descriptor come from? And how are your magic shows different from, say, the ones you might see in Las Vegas?
Okay, well, for the past 23 years, I've been doing a live show in New York City. I've also taken it around the world to various other major metropolises, but New York City is my home base. For 17 of those years, I performed at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in the penthouse suite. So I think that kind of speaks to the Millionaire's Magician moniker, is that the people who come to the Waldorf Astoria were really kind of, people who were enjoying the finer things in life. So I performed the show at the Waldorf for, as I said, 17 and a half years, moved the show to the New York Palace Hotel, which is a really ultra luxury 19th century mansion in the middle of Manhattan, right behind St. Patrick's Cathedral. And when people come to the magic show, it's a real experience. It's not just like you're going to a conference room or going into, a bar. It's actually a 19th century parlor, which has gilded ceilings and beautiful marble pillars and Persian rugs. And the experience is one that you kind of, will think about afterwards as a step back in time. So that's really what I think differs from my show with a lot of other magic shows, is that I'm trying to honor the history of magic and bring it back to life again. Many times magicians try to be au courant and make something which is very, of the times. But in my case, we have everyone dress up in cocktail attire, and it's very elegant and kind of, I wouldn't say staid evening, because it's not that at all. It's really fun, but it is more of a formal dress-up affair. And I've had many people say to me afterwards, like, why did you make us dress up? And then, when they walk in, they say, oh, now I get it, because you're in this really ultra luxury 19th century mansion. It looks like you're walking into Versailles.
So it's very intimate. So I think maybe people have been to a big magic show. There's fog machines and lasers and maybe some tigers. You're trying to go back to that where it's a small room, a group of people, and it's a very intimate experience.
That's correct. Yeah. So the maximum size audience that I perform for at the Palace Hotel for my show Chamber Magic is 64 people. So it's very intimate. Anytime you're under 100 is intimate.
So the reason I brought you on is back in 2006, you wrote a book called Win the Crowd. And what it is you talk about what you do as a magician to practice good showmanship. So being a great magician isn't just about mastering the technique. That's an important part. That's a necessary and essential part. But it's not sufficient. You also need to have charisma, understand psychology, understand presentation. And the things you use as a magician, you make the case that it can apply to anybody who's trying to present themselves in the world, whether in business or in their personal life. And in Win the Crowd, you start the book off highlighting what you call your 5 maxims of magic that can be used to persuade and influence. And the first maxim is be bold. So as a magician, what does that look like for you?
To take risks. Don't be shy about the actions you take or the words that you speak. And so really what that means to me is that you need to try things that you've never tried before. Otherwise, you won't get results that you've never had before. And so, there's a great magician. His name was Jimmy Grippo. And the legend goes that Jimmy Grippo was sitting in a bank just before closing hour. And he saw that the bank manager was about to close the safe, that time locked safe. And he just took this bold moment and he took a playing card that he had in his pocket. Let's say it was the 3 of diamonds. And he just flung it with his hand. He flung it and whipped it, and it skirted underneath the door as the safe door was closing. So now inside of this locked safe on the floor is a 3 of diamonds just sitting there, unbeknownst to the bank manager or anyone else in that bank. So now he walks away with a kind of a tingle in his eye, and he goes home and thinks, how am I going to take advantage of this? So the next day he goes back to the bank and he sees the bank manager and he says, I'd like to show you a magic trick. I remember me from yesterday? And the manager's like, yeah. And so he says, let me show you a card trick. And he pulls out a deck of cards that matches the same card back design as the one that he had flung inside the vault. And he made sure that this bank manager took a card which was identical, the 3 of diamonds. There's magic ways to do that. And so after the bank manager took the 3 of diamonds, he put the card back in the deck, and Jimmy Grippo says, now I'm going to make your card disappear and reappear inside that vault. And the bank manager says, that's impossible. He said, well, open it up. And he says, I can't open it because it doesn't open until the time lock opens at 8 a.m. So he says, okay, well, just wait for it. And they waited, and they opened up the vault, and sure enough, on the floor is that 3 of diamonds. And so that's a miracle, right? I mean, the bank manager's eyes bulged out of his head. He wouldn't stop talking about it. And that's the type of story that would create legends that would actually pay off in great dividends for Jimmy Grippo for years to come. Look, we're talking about it decades after he's died. So you never would really know the outcome unless you gave it a try. And that's really what boldness means to me as a magician, is that unless you try something that may fail, you may not ever actually get any magnificent outcome. Now, having said that, what happens if he goes back to the bank and the manager wouldn't let him perform a card trick? Or what happens if the bank manager took the wrong card? Or what if the bank manager said, go away. We don't need to see this now. We've got other things going on. I have a manager's meeting. Well, then that's a lost opportunity. But at the same time, he didn't really lose anything at all. It was a trial which could eventually turn into something magnificent. And if it fails, it doesn't harm anyone. So I think that's really what being bolder is wrapped up in.
So how can regular people be more bold in their social interactions, you think?
Well, I mean, I think part of it is just to overcome your natural tendency to be quiet and to shut up, just to become a bigger version of yourself. So for instance, let's say you're in an elevator and you see some random person just standing there. The likely response would just be to be quiet, not say anything. But if you want to practice being a little bit bolder, one thing that you could do is just say to that person, hey, nice sweater you're wearing there. I like that. Or maybe the person might respond, thank you. Maybe they'll think you're a creep. Maybe they'll ignore you and just get off the elevator. But what you've just done is you've built up a little bit of a notch in your belt of being bold. You've tried something you haven't tried before. Now, admittedly, that's a simple drill, right? That's not something that would really be, some great advancement in your ability to be bold. However, another example I give in the book, which I love, and I've actually done this to people and have it had done to me, is what we call the quarter load. And you've heard of pickpocketing, right? People go up to you and they bump into you and they steal your wallet if you're in the subway or if you're walking around in a crowded place. That happens. It has happened, for centuries. However, this is the opposite. It's called the quarter load. You're pocketing. You're putting things into people's pockets. And again, this is just, it sounds like a joke, sounds like a gag, sounds like a ruse, but I've done this many times. And I think this can help you build up your courage and your boldness and your ability to feel like you can do things you haven't done before. So what I do is I walk around with a bunch of quarters in my pocket. And these days, hardly anyone carries change, but I have done this for many years. And when you see someone, you kind of just tap them. And one of the quarters you've had hidden in your hand, I forgot to mention, you hide one quarter inside of your fingers. And when you tap the person, you load the quarter into their jacket pocket. Now, it could be their side pocket, it could be their breast pocket, it could be their purse. If it's a woman, it could be, a shirt pocket, it could be any sort of a pocket. But the idea is to try to load this coin inside of someone's pocket. Now, why would you do that? It seems like a foolish task for me to give you. What it does is it gives you this giddy feeling that you've just invaded their space, that you're not stealing anything from them. You're not taking anything from them. In fact, you're giving them value. You're giving them a little bit of money, not very much, admittedly, but you're giving them something. And at the same time, you're walking away thinking, I just got away with something and it's made me stronger. And it's so foolish and it sounds ridiculous. And I've had people say, that's how you're going to teach someone to become bolder. And I've had people do it to me. And they walk up to me and they're just talking to me. They pat me on the chest like, hey, how's it going, Cohen? And then I go home and sure enough, I find a quarter in my pocket. One man did it to me. He loaded an amethyst crystal into my pocket. And then he emailed me the next day saying, see, I got you. And it gave him this sense of power. It gives the people who've done this to me this sense of power. And it's not much power, but it gives you the feeling of what it feels like to be bold.
So the second maxim is expect success. And I think this is with Grippo. He not only was he bold, but he expected success with this trick. As a magician, when you're working, how do you go into a show expecting success?
Well, I've got an interesting story about this. So one of my very close friends, unfortunately passed away at a young age, was named Mark Sisher. He was a great magician. He had just graduated from college, worked for a couple of years before passing away. But I remember I was living overseas. I was living in Tokyo, Japan at the time, and I got a letter from him because this is before the age of email and before cell phones. We're talking, decades back. And he sent me a typewritten letter. And in the letter, he said, Steve, I figured out how to perform magic more effectively. And what he wrote was that he doesn't go into his performance venues thinking that it's an adversarial relationship, but he goes in there assuming that the audience already loves him. And he said, by assuming that my audience already loves me, then I don't have to be aggressive towards them to try to push them to like me. And I thought that was really interesting because, magic in general is rather adversarial, right? I mean, I'm going to fool you, you can't catch me, right? That's what a lot of magic is. And the audience, if given that prompt, will probably say, okay, I will try to catch you and you're not going to fool me. So the difference being now, if, like my friend Mark Sisher said, if you go in there assuming that people are already going to love you, you're expecting success. And that changes the tone of the performance. It changes the tone of the engagement that you're going to have with your audience. Now, having said that, most people who are listening to this, I'm assuming, are not magicians. So what would that mean then for someone else? Well, I would write down, for example, the likely outcomes of what an experience, what an engagement might be, and think of what's the best possible way that this can possibly go. So whether you're having a business meeting or a presentation, think of what the best possible outcome is, and then actually focus on that. A lot of times we think about what the negative things are, like what can go wrong. Never apologize, never panic, never go into something thinking, okay, this is going to fail. I just go into my performances thinking, I've done this before. I know it's going to work and it's going to work. So it's very, it's kind of basic. It's kind of a simple thinking, but if you know what your desired outcome is, then you can veer towards that in the right direction.
I think oftentimes when people give public speeches, they're afraid that everyone's just judging them and looking at all their mistakes. And really, if you think about it, when I'm listening to someone give a speech, I'm rooting for them. I want them to do well. I want them to succeed. And even when they have a slip up, I'm not like, oh, what a dum-dum. I'm just like, that's all right. You can recover from this. And that can happen in social interactions too. I think when you're interacting with somebody, at least when I am interacting with somebody, I'm not thinking, boy, this person, what a dum-dum. I'm thinking, hey, I want this person to do okay here. So I think that mentality can apply to anybody. How do you expect success when things go wrong, right? So I imagine you've done thousands and thousands of shows. Not every trick goes off the way it's supposed to. So what do you do when something doesn't go as planned so you can still maintain that idea of expect success?
Right. Well, here's the thing. Yes, I have done thousands of shows. In fact, this public show, Chamber Magic, will be celebrating its 6,000th performance this fall. and this is in 2023. So, if you've done, the show is nearly 2 hours long, 12,000 hours of performing, lots of things have gone wrong. And because lots of things have gone wrong, I've built up kind of an arsenal of ways to get around that. Maybe that means that I'm seeing something happen. I see something going south before the audience does. And I have what's basically a plan B and a plan C. Magicians like to call these outs. And an out is basically just knowing a possible ending that would not be the number one desirable ending, but it's the number 2 or number 3 desirable ending. And it could be, a little less effective, but it's still an ending. So I think that one of the great things that you could do is, if you are going to give a presentation or a public speech, if you're giving any sort of a sales talk, it's nice to challenge yourself with what could go wrong and then have contingencies. So it's not worth panicking. It's not worth apologizing. If something goes wrong, you don't even have to say anything. You just say, okay, let's try again. I've dropped cards. I've dropped things in front of an audience. I've had props fail when I had important people in the audience. And remember, I'm performing for, people who are, celebrities, for billionaires, for heads of state. And you don't want to be making mistakes in front of these people. But by putting undue pressure on yourself, then most likely you might actually be moving in the wrong direction. So typically what I like to do is give myself the leeway of making 5 mistakes. And I learned this from one of my mentors and teachers and friends, is Juan Tamariz, a very famous Spanish magician from Madrid, Spain. He says that he gives himself the leeway to make 5 errors because you're human. You know that you're liable to make a mistake. So if you make a mistake, why be so hard on yourself? So what Tamariz says is, if you make a mistake, first mistake, you just chalk it off number 1. That's mistake number 1. And you just keep moving forward. As another friend of mine says, it ain't Shakespeare. So if you make a mistake, it's okay. And if you make mistake number 2 and you're like, okay, there was mistake number 2 to be expected within my given 5 mistakes in this show. Make mistake number 3 and you're like, okay, well, hold on a second. Maybe this isn't the audience. Maybe this might be me. Let me really kind of drill down here and focus on what's going wrong. Mistake number 4, I actually have never gotten that far, but I would probably be thinking to myself, maybe I shouldn't have drunk that beer before this show. And then mistake number 5 would be like, okay, we're on red alert, but still within the range of allowables. So the point being, if you know that you're human, which we all are, it's okay to make a mistake, and audiences are forgiving. And even with the magic trick, where if someone sees the hidden handkerchief sticking out of your hand, it's like, okay, well, how else would I do the trick? Of course I have 2, but that makes it much harder to make them both disappear and then make both the handkerchiefs disappear. So, there's lots of different ways that you can think on your toes to just kind of get out of something if you made a mistake. And that's just being resourceful. I like to call it spontaneous resourcefulness. And that goes into another one of my maxims, which is be prepared. And we could talk about that one later.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about it. I think that's the last one you have there. Okay, so expect success, go in with a positive attitude, think about how things can go right, and then have contingency plans if things don't go according to the original plan. The third maxim is don't state, suggest. So flesh that out for us. What does that look like?
Okay. Well, this is something that, I've actually learned with the character that I've created, which is the Millionaire's Magician. So Millionaire's Magician doesn't necessarily mean that we check people's bank balances at the front door when they're checking in. But, I am a character. I've created a character and I portray a character on stage. And what I like to think of is anyone, when you're in front of an audience, is playing a character. Now, maybe it's just an enlargement or enhancement of yourself when you're off stage or when you're not in front of of an audience, but you're basically creating a visual and an auditory vision of what you should be like, what you want your audience to take away. So do you want your audience to think of you as someone conservative, as someone funny? Do you want to think of you as an open collar person versus a button down collar person, and necktie, no necktie, dress, no casual clothes? I personally am wearing a tuxedo when I perform. I wear, an evening wear, or sometimes I wear a morning suit. And what it does is suggests how I expect my audience to behave with me. If I were wearing a t-shirt and jeans and, black sneakers when performing in my venue, it wouldn't make sense. If I was a character in a book or a movie, the author wouldn't write about, it would be such a disconnect to have someone casual in such a formal environment. So the venue plus my attitude, plus my clothing, plus the way I groom myself and the way I speak, all of these kind of suggest that the audience should act a certain way toward me. And fortunately, by making this large, kind of stage that people are coming into, they're stepping into a scene in a play in a way. And that's how I like to think of, suggesting as opposed to stating. We don't tell people, you're going to be stepping back in time, walking into a 19th century parlor. We just, once they walk in, they kind of discover it themselves. And then they react in the way that I've kind of set them up to. And I think that's actually a better mechanism rather than for me to force it down their throat. It would be kind of an insult to your intelligence. If I just said to you, I possess magical powers and you're going to believe in my special abilities, people would say, come on, who do you think you are? But if I slowly wrap them up into this world where they start seeing incredible things happen and they realize that this is a step out of reality, then they enter my world. And I've seen this not only in magic, I've seen great salespeople do this. Even if you go to a seminar, like let's say Tony Robbins or someone who's a motivational speaker, like during the time that you're with that person, you are wrapped up in their world. And it's not because they forced you to, but it's because you responded to the suggestions that they made.
Okay, so if a regular person, if you want people to treat you with respect and authority, then dress that way, act that way. Don't tell people you have to respect. Yeah, usually if you have to tell people you must respect me, you've lost already.
Of course. Yeah. I remember this happened one time. I had a very horrible performance. It was in Long Island, this women's event that I got hired to do. And they were not there to watch a magic show. They were there to kibitz with each other. And they were there it was like some sort of like a flea market type of thing that I don't even know why they hired me to perform at it, but it was just an awkward environment for me to perform in. And all through the show, the audience was not really paying attention. They were just chit-chatting with each other. And at one point I realized I can't go on. I can't continue this performance. I was standing on a platform and nobody was paying attention. So I stopped the show and I walked off. And then this lady who had hired me walked on and said, come on, everyone. This guy is really good. You should pay attention to him. You should pay attention to him. He's really good. And I walked back up on stage and it was even worse because by begging, the whole thing fell apart. So yeah, that was an example of trying to convince someone with your words that you're good is not as good as trying to convince them just by your suggestions.
We're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. And now back to the show. So the fourth maxim is practice, practice, practice. Walk us through the amount of practice you have done and still do as a magician. Like, what does your practice process look like?
Okay. So I'm practicing all the time. I've been doing magic since I was 6. I'm now 52. And there's not a day that goes by where I'm not with a deck of cards in my hands or practicing with coins or other small objects. Sometimes I'll practice a move, a sleight of hand move with a deck of cards, for example, for years before I'm ready to really include it in my performance. And the idea is to make the moves so smooth and so subtle that they become invisible to the audience. Not only wouldn't they be able to see them, but they wouldn't even be able to sense them or be able to realize that there's any sort of tension in my hands. Really, that's what the human eye responds to, is tension. Right? If you see something tense up, then you think, oh, there must be something going on there. I have to pay attention. So really what I'm trying to do with my magic is perfect the moves, refine them to such a degree that they really kind of disappear from your suspicion. So practice for me is something that's fun. I think that that practice should be an enjoyable experience. Of course, it could be grueling, and at the end of the day, you might be sweaty, but that procedure of pushing yourself to get better and better should be something that's enjoyable. And if you don't enjoy the craft, maybe trying something else might be a better use of your time. If you don't enjoy the hard work that you have to put into something in order to enjoy the spoils, then maybe that craft might not be the one for you. So what I like to do is I just practice in isolation. Sometimes I'll practice something with my eyes closed. After I've perfected the sleight, I'll practice it without looking. And other times I'll practice it without speaking. So kind of isolating the different skills rather than performing the move with my patter, which is the language that magicians use to back up the trick, sometimes I'll just perform it in silence and just go through the entire routine, which could be like, an 8-minute performance silently, almost like a silent movie. Sometimes I'll just put the props away and do it without any emotion. I'll just do it in my head, or I'll just say the words aloud, and then I'm focusing on the language. So most importantly, though, I think is what I call PP. And PP is people's practice, or people practice. When you perform in front of people, that's when you really can understand what all of this means and how it will play out in the real world. So, performing in front of a mirror or in front of a video camera is great, and it's a necessity before you perform in front of an audience. But you never really learn until you perform in front of living, breathing people. And, I'll be honest, like there's been times where I thought a trick would go really well by practicing, and then I get in front of people and they could see through it instantly. And I'm like, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? And the fact is, I just only practiced it in isolation. I didn't get it in front of real people. And, you learn by listening to the audience. I remember one time David Copperfield came to my show at the Waldorf Astoria where I started. And Copperfield and I spent time, about 2 hours afterwards, and he said to me, "You can't write a show like that. What you just put on was a show that was responding to the audience. And you've listened to the audience for so many years that you learn what works and you've learned what doesn't work." And he was right. I've never actually written a script for the show. Now I've transcribed the show, but I never sat down and wrote every word out. But I listened to the audience and I listened to what they responded to, and therefore it became more of a success.
When you're doing this people practice, when you first start out, like let's say you're doing a new trick, you're not going to your main event show, the chamber show. Are you going to maybe like just random people with low stakes to do that?
That's one way to do it. That's one way to do it. I have the challenge that I have right now is, I have an audience that expects something. They expect nothing but excellence, right? If they're paying top Broadway money to come to see my show, which it is, there was a time when we were charging $750 per ticket to the show. Now we've lowered it back down to a more reasonable range of between $125 and $350 per ticket. So we're talking, still a significant investment. You're not expecting to see someone try things out for the first time, right? This shouldn't be the venue, the playground where he's trying out his experimental work. So I do need to have a place to perform and try out these things. And that could be as simple as trying out a magic trick for my family, or it could be trying out some magic for my dry cleaner at the dry cleaning shop, or it could be, just even not even performing the trick, but just telling people about it. And sometimes by telling people about it, then it actually helps to find what people find intriguing about it without even performing the trick. So I know I've experienced this. I'm friends with David Blaine, and I remember when David Blaine would talk about, his upcoming stunt, he would tell people about it, and he would see what people were excited by. So if he's saying like, I'm going to stand on top of a pillar, people go, oh, okay. I'm going to stand on top of a pillar for 72 hours. People go, oh, really? He says, yeah, and there's not going to be anything there for me to hold on to. And if the wind comes, I can just be blown off the top of this pillar. And then he sees the audience go, oh, and you see, by learning what makes the audience go, oh, you don't even have to be performing it. You could just be telling the story of something. And by telling the story of something before you actually do it in front of the target audience, you learn in advance what's intriguing to other people. And I imagine, you talk about how regular people can apply this. If you are given a presentation, you just want to practice that over and over again. And then do it in front of people too. Do it in front of family members, low stakes. Another thing I thought of as I was reading that section on how non-magicians could practice in front of people with low stakes. Let's say you want to get better at public speaking. Toastmasters. We had a guest on the show who wrote a book about Toastmasters. Great place to go. Everyone's there to get better and give you feedback. There's no stakes involved. But he found that actually doing the public speaking, that's how he got better at it. So you can do the same thing as a regular person that a magician does. Correct. You get good at something by doing it. I mean, it's as simple as that. There's no real substitute for what Penn Jillette often calls flight time on stage. As a pilot, you get your pilot's license by the number of hours you've flown. And the same thing with skydiving, right? By the number of jumps you've done. So it's the same thing on stage. The more that you're on stage, the more you're actually paying yourself to become a better performer.
All right. So the final maxim, we just mentioned it a while back ago, is be prepared. So as a magician, what does this look like?
Well, when I walk into any room, the first thing I start to do is I look around and see what's there. And I'm a magician, so I should be able to do magic with anything. So I look around and I see, oh, here's a salt shaker. Over there, there's a piece of newspaper. Over here, this person's wearing a diamond ring. That woman has earrings on. This guy's got a Submariner watch. And I'm thinking, like, what can I do with any of those objects? And I have a kind of a mental Rolodex that I go through, and I think, okay, I know tricks with a watch. I know tricks with the salt shaker. I know tricks with a newspaper. And now I'm starting to formulate things in advance so that when it comes down to the time of performance, which may be half an hour from now, I'm never caught unaware. And that's the beauty of it, is that you're kind of, I'm a Boy Scout. I was actually an Eagle Scout when I was younger in Troop 174 from Yorktown Heights, New York. And so, the slogan of the Boy Scouts is to be prepared. And I really think that's key to being a magician, having months, maybe even years of planning in advance before the audience even knows that there is a performance being given. Michael Weber, a well-known magician, says that you have to be so far ahead of the game that the audience doesn't even know there's a game being played yet. And I really love that. I think that you have to really just be thinking several steps ahead. And what it boils down to is just knowing your audience. Like when I go into an audience, when I'm performing for people, I like to know what kind of a crowd this is. So maybe in advance, I might just look at the sales list for the day and say, okay, where are these people coming from? Oh, okay, we have people coming from California. We have people coming from France. We have people who are visiting from China. We've got people who are visiting from the tri-state area. It helps me to know the audience in advance. And I like to call that the get to know you technique. It's just really like, having a little bit of rapport before the audience realizes that there's a need to have a rapport. And that preparation will help you out even before you arrive.
So you have a chapter that's all about building up conviction and confidence in yourself. Why is that important for you as a magician in order to win the crowd?
Well, think about it. People want to be around people who are confident and who are almost larger than life. I think that it's more interesting to be around people who are sure of themselves, right? I mean, when you walk into any sort of an event, or if you're going to be giving a presentation again, we don't want someone who is a self-proclaimed failure to be giving us advice. We want someone who's going to be, rather accomplished giving us advice, because maybe we might learn something from them. We're always more interested in people who are bringing something to the table that we don't personally already have. So that's one of the beauties of being a magician, is that, people aren't exposed to magic every day. So when they come across someone who's a magician, and if this person appears to be a good magician, then they're probably going to be excited to be with you. And that's really what it is. It's kind of building up the excitement of being in your presence. And, again, you don't want to make it like you're fishing for their approbation, or you want to make it so that they just feel excited to be around you because you seem like a fun person, or you seem like an intelligent person, or you seem like someone who brings something to their life that they don't already have.
And how do you develop that confidence and conviction?
Once again, it boils down to being sure in your work, thinking that your own work is important. I'll put it this way, actually, there's a great story. I'm going to tell you this story. It's in the book, so I'll read it to you the way I wrote it. It's actually pretty concise. So there are 3 bricklayers, and someone asked the 3 laborers, "What are you doing?" And the first bricklayer says, "I'm laying brick." And the second bricklayer says, "I'm making $10 an hour." But the third bricklayer says, "Me, I'm building the world's greatest cathedral." And I really love the attitude of that third bricklayer, because he knows that his work is important to himself. So, being a magician is not on the highest list of people's prestigious occupations. I remember going through customs in London one time. I was arriving for a performance, and the customs agent said to me after looking at my passport, "What do you do for a living?" And it said magician. And he laughed at me and he pointed at my ski cap and he said, "What, are you going to pull a rabbit out of your ski cap? Come on, what's your real job?" And I had to tell him, I'm really a magician, but I'm proud of that. And being proud of your work, thinking that your work is important, thinking that you do a first-rate job, that's important. You can say to yourself, even, there's like a mantra you can say, I am important. I perform my work with dignity. I do a first-rate job every day. And, it's important to think that your work is important. And whether you're a banker, whether you're a salesperson, whether you're a performer like me, or anything you do, you never say, I'm just a blank. I'm just a clerk. I'm just an analyst. Basically, you have to put a top hat on your head mentally and think, I'm a magician, not a literal magician, but I do things in a magical way. I do things with power. I do things with confidence. And by telling yourself that, you kind of make yourself into a little bit of a celebrity. And, no one wants to walk around thinking like, oh, I'm an A-list celebrity if you're not. But if you think of yourself as someone with power and ability and maybe even a sense of beauty, and it just builds your own confidence. You could do that by dressing a certain way. You could do that by speaking with, by puffing up your chest. And, it makes you just feel a little bit more confident. And then you'll see the response of people. And when people respond that way, it kind of is a feedback loop.
Okay, so again, you kind of do. You have to maybe suggest yourself. Don't state to yourself. Suggest to yourself that you are confident, right? So dress the way and act the way.
Exactly.
You talk about in the book, like move like deliberately and with conciseness. That can also help bolster your confidence.
I agree. I remember one time I had a superintendent in my building in New York City, one of my first apartments, and this guy really did not know what he was doing. He was kind of just a bumbling super, meaning that he didn't really know how to screw a screw into the wall. And if he was reaching for his screwdriver in the toolkit, he didn't even know where it was. He had to dig around and find basic tools, and then he didn't know where to, did I have a Phillips head screwdriver or a flathead screwdriver? He really was just clueless. And I realized I can't trust this man to help me with fixing my sink because it's not going to hold. Later on, that guy got fired, not surprised. And then they hired a new super, and this super was really on top of things. So when he reached for the screwdriver, it was where he expected it to be. And when he was putting together the cabinet that I needed him to help me fix, it went together 1, 2, 3, snippity snap. And it had to do with the fact that he was confident and he acted deliberately. He knew where things were, and it gave me a sense of confidence as, a resident is in his building. So when I'm performing my shows, I like to have things always in the same place. So if I reach, I don't even need to look where my hand is moving. I know that an object is where it is because it's always there. And I have the luxury of always performing, of course, in the same venue. So, if I put something down, it's going to always be in the same spot. I don't have to go fumbling for it or looking for it. So the audience sees that I'm a confident person because there's no hiccups. I just reach for something. It's always there. I'm able to do what I do with an intent. And what I also like to do, and I mentioned this also in the book, is to speak to myself. Is this how an important person would say this? Or is this how a powerful person would act? Would my boss act this way? Would my customer act this way? And would a successful person argue over this or not? And so by mentally framing these things in your head and then adjusting the way that you speak or present it, you're actually leading yourself into a successful path.
So one of my favorite chapters in the book was all about how to command a room. And this is useful advice for someone who's presenting in front of an audience, giving a pitch at a business meeting or giving a public speech. Or I think it can also apply just in everyday social interactions. And so this idea of commanding the room, the first step you say you have to do as a magician is you have to own the stage. As a magician, how do you own the stage so that you can command the room?
What I like to do is first, I like to always arrive at the venue early and tread the boards. The boards meaning the stage, right? That's the actor's vernacular for walking onto a stage. So I like to walk on the stage and just get the feel for what the space is like. How deep is the room? How wide is this space? Do I need to step up steps before I walk onto the stage? Will there be a backstage area? Is there a green room? I just need to know all about the parameters that I'll be performing in first so that there's no surprises. Like that's really one of the key things I think about being a pro is reducing the number of surprises in your presentations so that by the time you actually get up there in front of an audience, you're able to focus on the people and the interaction and the give and take with your audience, as opposed to, is this glass of water going to tip over if I move my arm out? Or does the stage have like a squeaky floor? Or am I going to walk too far towards the audience and possibly fall off stage? Knowing all these things in advance just reduces the number of variables so that when you get up there, you're not going to really be worried too much.
I think that's really good. So I think if you're giving a public speech, I think that's useful advice too. You get up there early, know what the stage looks like, make sure you know where the podium's going to be. And you can even, if you want to own the stage, you can probably maybe move things around, right? Well, I don't like this. Let's move this around. That can help instill some more confidence in you, in yourself.
I agree. One way that you can do this, even in your own life, when you're just sitting at a table, let's say you're having a business meeting or business talk at a restaurant. So I like to think of the interaction as kind of like a control of the real estate of that table. And people don't often think about this, but you can move things around on tables that you have more space. You can move the glass out of the way. You can move the flower vase out of the way. You can move the salt shaker out of the way. You can move the plates and stack them up. You can move the forks so that you have more room. And even just subtle things like this show that you're owning your environment. So again, these are not overt things. You don't say like, look, I'm going to take over this table, therefore I own this conversation. It's not that overt. It never is. A lot of what being a magician is about making these implications of power. And the implication of power then kind of gives a little bit of a hint or a clue for someone to respond to you just that little bit differently. So I do this oftentimes, I'll make the space mine. And by making the space mine, I just feel like there's less that's going to impede me from moving forward in the way I planned. So I think that's a little tiny tip that you can try. It doesn't cost you anything, right? When you're at a restaurant, just try that. Even when you're out on a date or you're with your family, it doesn't take any extra effort. But you might just feel a little different and a little more powerful because you've done something to create your own space. Now, when I walk on stage, you asked about how do you command the room. I have ways of walking in that I use, and I've learned this again from my teacher Juan Tamariz, who's a teacher not only to me but to thousands of magicians around the world, but has fortunately become a personal friend. So Tamariz taught this great technique when you walk on stage to fan the room with your eyes. Now, what does that mean? So usually when you walk on, you're not walking on from the back of the auditorium or back of the audience towards the front. You're walking on from the side, right? You have to, let's say the audience is in front of you. You're walking onto the stage from either stage left or stage right. And so let's say you're walking on from stage right. So you're walking on up maybe a few steps or maybe just, onto the stage. And the audience will see your profile if you're looking at stage left. They'll only see your profile. But wouldn't it be great if every person can see the front of your face, a full frontal view, to give your smile a chance to shine? Well, the way that you do that is when you're walking on stage, you start looking at the audience that's furthest to your left, if you're starting from the right. And then as you get to the center stage, you fan your face, meaning you turn your head all the way towards the area where you walked on. So you're giving the entire almost 180 degree circle or half circle of your face to the entire audience. And they're now able to see you and experience you with your smile and your light in your eyes rather than just your profile. And it just gives you more of a connection right away. There's an interesting thing I didn't write about in this book, but I've learned since, is if you watch a Mickey Mouse cartoon, like anything for, Walt Disney, animation, you'll see that Mickey Mouse's ears are always full circles. Or often full circles. I'm sure there's exemptions to this. But oftentimes what will happen is even if he turns his head left or turns his head right, you'll still see these full circles of his ears because that's the iconic Mickey Mouse pose and face and image and icon that we've become familiar with. So, it's in a similar way. Imagine if you're able to show your face to every audience, every part of the audience, no matter where they're seated, in the left, right, middle, back, center. When you walk on, that's how you do that, by fanning the room.
Well, another tip that I liked in there about walking on to the stage is that you don't start from a dead stop. You actually start walking when you're off stage so that when you hit on stage, it looks more like you're floating and not sort of getting started. And that it just adds some dynamism to your presence.
Right. So one of the things I like to call it is the invisible steps. So again, if let's say that you're walking on stage from behind a curtain, rather than just standing still and then walking on, which means that you're kind of ramping up to your full speed and your full kind of energy, take a couple of steps back from the curtain and start the advancement onto stage from several feet away from the edge of the stage. So by the time that you hit the curtain and you've broken the curtain line, now the audience sees you coming out in a powerful and energetic way. Now, I learned this the hard way from being on the David Letterman show. I was a guest on Letterman when he had Close Up Magic Week. And if you haven't seen my performance of that on YouTube, you should check it out. It was a really great experience. But I remember standing backstage, I was kind of petrified because this is, the Ed Sullivan Theater. I'm backstage. This is where the Beatles performed. I mean, come on. I was, pretty intimidated. And Biff Henderson, who is the stage manager, he shoved my shoulder when it was time for me to walk on. So I heard Letterman say, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Steve Cohen." And then Biff Henderson shoves me, and my first step onto the stage was a stumble. And I stumbled on and then kind of got my pace and kept on walking to center stage. So why am I telling you this? It looked stupid. And I mean, maybe it didn't really feel that, or it didn't look that bad to the viewer at home. But when I look at it, I was like, man, I did not have control over that entrance. Someone else controlled the entrance for me. And that's not how I want to walk on stage. So now I have this solid rule that by the time they see me break into the spotlight, I'm walking in full energy capacity. And I think that's done by taking a few steps off stage before entering on stage.
So in a magic show, there's the trick itself, right? And that's the technique is important, but an important part to make the trick work is the patter, like the words you're using while you're doing the trick, because it's going to help direct people's attention where you want it to be. And it also just makes it more engaging. In the book, you give some specific things that you do when you're writing your patter, your script, to be persuasive. I like some of these things were interesting. Like one is you used what's called layered commands. So instead of saying to someone, "Here, hold this card," you'll say, "Stand up and hold this card." There's two commands there, stand up and hold this card. What is about putting two commands that helps you be more persuasive as a magician?
And people think that patter is just, the banter, the idle language that magicians use to kind of distract you from what's really happening. But the fact is, it's all serving the end purpose of a successful demonstration of magic, is that the language has to support the magic, the handling, and the handling has to support the language. They have to really coexist in like kind of a symbiosis. So there's no magic words like alakazam or hocus pocus or abracadabra that will really create magic, but there are patterns of language that you can use, even if you're not a magician, to kind of create a magical outcome. So this concept of a layered command, which is basically a command, the word and another command, it makes it harder for people to say no to either one of those two commands. So for example, if I were to say to you, "Stand up," it's easy for you to resist and say, "Well, no, why?" And if I were to say, "Here, hold the end of this rope," the person says, "Well, why? What do you want me to do?" They can resist it. But if I say, "Stand up and hold the end of this rope," people will not really deny either of those. They'll simply stand up and hold the rope. And it's kind of uncanny. It's something you should really give a try to. And you can try it again, not just if you're a magician, because most people listening to this aren't magicians, but you could try it, let's say, with your kid. If you could say, "Take out the garbage and close the door when you go out." And so take out the garbage, they might say no to. Close the door behind you when they go out, they might say no to. But take out the garbage and close the door. It's like, okay, there's two commands. It almost short circuits the ability to say no. In the office, finish this project and let me know when you're done. They're not going to not finish the project. They're not going to not let you know when you're done because you've given them two commands. Come over here and give me a kiss. By the way, don't use that at the office. But we're on a date, come over here and give me a kiss. These are small little things you can try. Now, does it work every time? No. But will it work? Yes. And, it's actually fun to try these layered commands and see what works for you. Nothing is an exact science, but it could work. And when it does work, you can see if you can make it work again. Because, what works for you is not going to work for me and vice versa. So you give these layered commands. It'll give you the feeling of being an authority figure. It helps you appear stronger. And yeah, I think that's a really fun one to try. Now, another magic word, so to speak, which I might recommend your listeners use if you want to give this a try yourself, Brett, it might be fun, is to use what I call the trailing oar. And I use this all the time in my work. and anyone could use this, it's not just limited to magicians. I say, would you like to shuffle the deck or, and then it's just ... Now the answer at that point would likely be no. So I say, would you like to shuffle the deck of cards or, and the reason is because in people's heads, they're finishing the sentence. The last word would be not, right? So would you like to shuffle the deck or not? But since I never say the word not, they say out loud, no. So that's where it starts to become an interesting thing. Would you mind if I eat the last piece of pizza or, and people will say, no, go ahead. Will there be a problem with that or, and then people would say, no, there's no problem. Do you mind if I leave a little early or? You see people that say, sure. It just feels like the natural ending to the sentence, not. And since people are saying it in their own head, they just will say no. Now, if you shrug your shoulders a little bit and kind of like, shake your head no as you're saying it, it also kind of gives them more of an incentive to respond no. And just try this. I'm telling you, it's a fun project to try on your own. You could just drop it in today to your conversation and see if it actually works in your favor.
Well, Steve, this has been a great conversation. Where can people go to learn more about your work?
Well, let me tell you a little secret.
Oh, that's another.
You can go to chambermagic.com. That's one of my other magic words. The moment you say, let me tell you a little secret, people will lean in. They're going to now want to know what your secret is. So even if you're not a magician, again, like everyone's got a secret, right? We all have secrets that we don't want people to know, to see, so if you say to someone, let me tell you a little secret, I really shouldn't tell you this, but promise me you won't tell this to anyone, but you can find more about me at chambermagic.com. Right. So now people are like, oh, wow, this is something that we weren't supposed to hear. We weren't supposed to know about. When people say, let me tell you a secret, it means pay attention. So I like to use that expression a lot. By the way, the show runs every weekend at the Lotte New York Palace Hotel, which is a really grand hotel in the middle of New York City. The show runs 250 live performances every year. So I'm always there every Friday and every Saturday. And it's a really fun place. If you do come to the show, please don't hesitate to walk up and tap me on the shoulder and say that you heard about it from this conversation. I love to meet people before, during, and after the show. And as you can see, I try to be as personable and as welcoming as I can to anyone who comes. So please, if you do come, let me know that you heard about it from this.
And maybe they can try to put a quarter in your pocket too while they're at it.
Absolutely. That's the thing. Definitely drop a quarter in my pocket. I will act surprised.
Well, Steve Cohen, thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
My guest was Steve Cohen. He's the author of the book, Win the Crowd. It's available on Amazon.com. You can find more information about his work at his website, chambermagic.com. Also check out our show notes at aom.is/winthecrowd, where you can find links to resources where you can delve deeper into this topic. Well, that wraps up another edition of the AOM podcast. Make sure to check out our website at artofmanliness.com, where you find our podcast archives, as well as thousands of articles that we've written over the years about pretty much anything you think of. And if you'd like to enjoy ad-free episodes of the AOM podcast, you can do so on Stitcher Premium. Head over to stitcherpremium.com, sign up, use code Manliness at checkout for a free month trial. Once you're signed up, download the Stitcher app on Android or iOS, and you can start enjoying ad-free episodes of the AOM podcast. And if you haven't done so already, I'd appreciate if you take 1 minute to give us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps out a lot. And if you've done that already, thank you. Please consider sharing the show with a friend or family member who you think would get something out of it. As always, thank you for the continued support. Until next time, it's Brett McKay, reminding you to not listen to the AOM podcast, but put what you've heard into action.